Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for our Comics Creator Chat. We're covering something near and dear to our hearts today with a cryptid-focused book. It's quite exciting, so it is my pleasure to introduce first-time guest Julio Anta on with me to talk about his new 5-issue Dark Horse Comics projects, The Beast of Boriken, a Tiny Onion Studios joint that's part of their ongoing True Weird series, co-created with artist Daniel Irizarri. So, Julio, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Great to have you on. Well, last Saturday was that most Halo days of in the comic book calendars, free comic book day, or I guess comics giveaway day to include PRH
Mhm.
because it's 2026, so everything needs to be complicated. But anyway, did you get a chance to get out and about for it?
Yeah, I did actually. I was in where was I? It was Bucks County Book Festival in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. So I was there for a book festival for my graphic novels. And it was a small little PA town, and they had a really cool comic shop there. I forget the name of it now, but it was right next to like a vintage video game store. And I went in there, picked up a few things. I actually have one of them here because I was just reading through it, the Blue Lock Color,
Oh,
issue. It's
nice.
like I think it's like half a chapter or something, but yeah, so I got to pick up a few things. I also got, I say for my son, but it's for both of us. I guess IDW is doing like these compact comics as well. They did a Godzilla one that has 25 issues for 14 bucks. So it was like
Oh, cool.
this thick. Yeah, it's awesome.
I can't usually do. I don't like the trades that are really even the omnibuses that are like super, super thick.
Hmm.
I don't know. They seem clunky to me, but that's awesome. Like
Yeah.
25 issues, super affordable.
Yeah, yeah, really good value. So that was cool. I haven't read it yet, but I have a long TBR, but I'll get to it eventually.
Don't we all? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to getting into Cy Spurrier's, Minotaur, I think is an
Mm.
Ignition Press book. So,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
that was a free comic book day one, so well,
Nice.
last year I interviewed Steve Fox about his true weird project, Let This One Be a Devil, whose
Mm.
focus was the Jersey Devil, and I've been anticipating which cryptid might be next. I was thinking it was likely gonna be Bigfoot, but I was happily wrong about that as you're focusing on one of my favorites, El Chupacabra. So, what was your personal endpoint with America's most infamous goat sucker?
Yeah. Alright, so, I grew up, watching this, like, tabloid TV program called Primer Impacto, with my
Okay.
grandma. So this was, I think Univision, if not Univision, Telemundo, but this was like, they had, like, witch doctors and fortune tellers and sort of like X-Files kind of like reporting, and it felt like every week they had a segment on another sighting of the Chupacabra. And it was, originally in Puerto Rico, where, 1995 is where the first sighting of the Chupacabra, or the first time that they name it the Chupacabra, because you can go further
Okay.
back to like 75, when it was called El Vampiro de Moca. Moca is a town in Puerto Rico, and it was just like the vampire of Moca. But yeah, like growing up, it felt like every week there was a new reporting. Like you would hear about it. Like it felt like a big part of like growing up in the '90s. So that was kind of my entry point. And as I became an adult, like kind of fell off. I stopped watching Primer Impacto with my grandmother. But eventually, without skipping too far ahead, eventually, I thought that the Chupacabra would be a really good entry point to talk about some bigger issues, that plague Puerto Rico in a comic book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've classically thought of Chupacabra as more of a southwestern cryptid, but
Mhm.
I mean, after I got into reading this and doing research and stuff, as you mentioned, the origins are in Puerto Rico, and it's a different interpretation, right? It's bipedal. It's much larger than the four-legged, more dog-like manifestation
Mhm.
we typically think about, and there's this clear connection with the title Borikin to looking at this cultural link with the indigenous Taino. I think I'm hopefully
Yep,
pronouncing that
Taino, yeah.
correctly. Yeah. So Borikin being their term to denote the spiritual heart of the island. So you have these two primary kind of narrative threads going on, the island and the creature as sort of the nucleus. So how did this all come together in your head?
Yeah, I will say that, it may sound it may sound kinda silly to say I took liberties with my cryptid, but I did take some liberties. The connection to the Taino culture was something that I sort of invented for this book. It's something that, the Chupacabra is a very young cryptid, right? So, like I mentioned before, 1995 is the first time it's named that, and 75 is the first time that, it's reported as something that sounds like the Chupacabra. So it's not that old compared to other cryptids. It's pretty young, and like you said, very quickly spread to other parts of the Americas. Particularly Mexico is where, when most people talk about the Chupacabra, most people think about Mexico. And they think
Yeah.
that that's where it originated, the Southwest. And then there's sightings all over Latin America. Um, but it originates in Puerto Rico, in Moca, in the mountainous areas where, the jibaros, the farmers, are working. It sucks the blood out of their livestock. It's funny, I've been making TikToks trying to, I got bullied into finally making TikToks to promote my books.
Mm, good luck.
And yeah. And the first one I made actually did pretty well. It was about this book. And it led to somebody, you can actually, if you go, you'll see in the comments, someone was like, can I DM you? I have information about the Chupacabra that you might be
Okay.
interested in. And then she DM'd me, and she was telling me that, uh, I forget, a relative of hers, was told by this guy that wrote like the first book about the Chupacabra that it was wholly invented by him, supposedly, with the idea to sell books about this creature. So that was like kind of like a cool little like, maybe an insight that I got from, posting a TikTok about this book. But to answer your question, it's Puerto Rico is obviously an island that has experienced colonization, ever since the invasion of the Spaniards in 1492, right? I
Yeah.
believe they landed in Puerto Rico in 93 on the second voyage. And so, there's the Taino people, which are the indigenous people of that island. They obviously, come face to face with the Spanish invasion. Hundreds of years later, the United States invades during the Spanish American War and now continues to hold this island as a sort of colonial treasure, right? Where Puerto Ricans on the island have less rights than Americans, than mainland Americans, and even Americans who moved to Puerto Rico have more rights than Puerto Ricans on the island. Um, and as time has gone on, we've seen like the colonialism of the United States and Puerto Rico take different shapes. At first it was sort of plundering of natural resources. And now it's really taken the shape of land grabs, of, these
Yeah.
uh, big, sometimes multinational corporations buying up land, building hotels, building luxury housing that prices out Puerto Ricans, promises some sort of jobs, but really just prices people out and pushes Puerto Ricans to the mainland of the US. So right now we're in a place where there are more Puerto Ricans in mainland United States than actually on the island. So right now there's a huge movement on the island to fight back against these luxury developments, and that's really what the human story of this book is about. It's about an activist named Loli, who is someone who lived through Hurricane Maria, survived Hurricane Maria with, I don't want to spoil anything about the book, but everyone in her family didn't make it through the hurricane. She had huge losses, huge personal losses, and Hurricane Maria was sort of a radicalizing moment for her as like a 17-year-old who now we are 8 years into the future. She's 26 in this book, and she's an activist and she's fighting against these companies that are coming in and trying to take away her homeland from her and her community. And at the start of the book, there's this luxury hotel development that's being built in Aguadilla in her hometown. And she's like a leading activist that's protesting it, but at the same time, it turns out that when they break ground, it awakens the Chupacabra, which is centuries old, back from the time of the Taino, which we, will go on to explore it in future issues, explore what it's like to be this, centuries old creature that has experienced so much loss, so much devastation at the hands of Spanish and US colonialism. and how the struggles of the Chupacabra and Loli sort of intersect. So yeah, it's a book that takes an issue that's sort of near to my heart. I'm not Puerto Rican, I'm Cuban. But there's a famous quote from a Puerto Rican poet that says that Cubans and Puerto Ricans are wings of the same bird. Our struggles are interconnected, not just because, we're so close, we're two island Caribbean nations, but because we both experienced Spanish and US colonialism, and imperialism. So, it's a book that obviously has a lot of there's a large political angle to the book, but
Sure.
it's also a tropical horror story that is inspired by all the like Universal monster movies that I grew up, all the creature features. Creature from the Black Lagoon is a huge sort of touchstone in this book and huge inspiration for this.
Okay.
Um, sort of like what happens when an inhuman creature encounters humanity for the first time. So that's the long answer to your question.
Yeah, I mean, prior to reading this, I honestly never would have considered the chupacabra as a symbol for revolution. I mean,
Mhm.
it I loved it. It's the way it was connected in this. Um, it was very educational for me because I had never really gotten into the meat of Act 60, formerly Act 20 and 22, which gives those outside businesses, investors, those huge tax breaks and
Yep.
capital gains incentives to relocate to Puerto Rico. So, and that was all post Maria legislation. So
Mhm.
connecting all these threads was really, really well done. I really
Thank
enjoyed the
you.
first issue.
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Well, Loli is, as you mentioned there, she's the primary protagonist here. And the blueprint for Let This One Be a Devil was bouncing back and forth between time periods. Is that a true weird remit, or was that you just like the blueprint, or how does that work?
Yeah, I read Let This One Be a Devil, and I really enjoyed that book. Our book is very different than the style of that book, but we do jump back and forth between timelines. So in issue 1, we start with Hurricane Maria, and it is Loli's experience during Hurricane Maria. We flash forward into the present day, and we a couple more times we go back to Hurricane Maria. But in future issues, we sort of go back to the history of the Chupacabra and we explore, its history throughout all those time periods that I mentioned before, right? So during the Spanish invasion, during, US military exercises where they are just bombing the island to test weapons, especially during the Korean War. So we go back to these sort of like key moments in Puerto Rican history and see how this mythical cryptid creature experiences them and how it
Okay.
shapes, its future and its sort of orientation towards this developer when the Chupacabra does eventually come face to face with this developer that is sort of destroying its homeland and destroying its peace because all what we sort of set up is that he just he's tired, he's experienced so much loss, he's experienced so much trauma over the centuries. He just wants the rest, but the specter uh, the colonialism on this island just won't let him.
Okay, so it's as much about as we're gonna unfold throughout the 5 issues, it's as much about trauma as anything else because Maria was this huge inflection point in 2017 where, Puerto Rico's, the complicated cultural landscape and all these economic ties with America to going on back to colonialism became national news in a way most of white America hadn't been exposed to before.
Yeah.
So kind of walk me through wanting to use Maria as the pivot, I guess, for all of that.
Yeah, well, I knew that I wanted to have a young protagonist. I most of the work that I've done in the last, I first started publishing 5 years ago. I had a book called Home at Image
Yeah,
Comics. And
loved
Home
it.
had a thank you. It had a
Yeah.
12-year-old protagonist. And that's sort of even though it was published in single issues in the direct market, it sort of introduced me to the world of young adult graphic novels. So I've sort of spent the last 5 years making middle grading young adult graphic novels for the traditional book market. I've had books like Frontera at HarperCollins. I did a Blue Beetle graphic novel called This Land Is Our Land at DC. That was part of the young adult line. A middle grade graphic novel called Speak Up Santiago, and a few others. But the point is that I've sort of had like young adult and middle grade protagonists have been sort of the work that I've been doing, over the last 5
Okay, yeah.
years. So I knew that I wanted to age up with a horror book that is written for adults, but it felt like, mid-20s would be the right age range for that. And very quickly, I just started realizing that, this person would have been a teenager during Hurricane Maria, which is this, like you said, huge inflection point, huge life-changing moment for most Puerto Ricans. And not just because of the attention that was brought to it, because this was a larger than life hurricane. I grew up in Miami, and we had hurricanes every year, right? There's a few that I remember that were like the big ones.
Yeah.
And those are moments that, you never forget, like the moments where you're like in the bathtub, which is a scene in this book, because that's, I don't know if it's actually the safest place. I grew up with that being the safest place in a hurricane to be in your
I don't
bathtub.
know. We
Um,
we evacuated from Ian actually a couple of years
yeah.
ago, so yeah,
Okay.
so I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like those are moments that I'll never forget, right?
Yeah.
And that was a moment like that for Puerto Rico, not just because of how devastating it was, but because of how the United States, which is supposed to be, you are a colonial subject of this country, which means that they're also supposed to take care of you, Puerto Rico was totally abandoned by the United States. And not just in like the really silly ways that we saw Trump throwing, paper towels and like, the really like egregiously offensive ways, just
Yeah.
from an image standpoint. But just from the fact that people didn't have electricity, some of them for months and months, just had no access to electricity. And a lot of that has to do with seeds that had been planted over a long period of time, right? With things like the privatization of Puerto Rico's electric grid, with just very little tax dollars going to actually support the island.
Yeah.
One of the sort of like key tenets of a colony is that the money is always sent to the colonizer, and that's very much what the colonial situation is like in Puerto Rico, whether it's through the federal government or through all these corporations that, use Puerto Rico to sort of strip the resources out and take it elsewhere. So, it's something that I felt like was a moment that if I did use a mid-20s character, this would be a radicalizing moment for that person, for a politically active person who's 25, 26 years old. So that very quickly kind of fell together. But I think also, I was doing a lot of reading at the time. There's a great nonfiction book called War Against All Puerto Ricans, which is
Okay.
about the 1950 revolution, the failed revolution against the U.S. government in Puerto Rico. Um, and reading that, I started seeing so many of the parallels between the revolution in the 1950s and the colonial situation in the 1950s to what it's like there today, and the time that I've spent there and, the friends that I have that are from Puerto Rico, like I have a nonfiction graphic novel called Si Se Puede. It's about important Latinos throughout US history. And the artist of that book is Yasmin Flores Montañez, and she's Puerto Rican. And the conversations that I've had with her about why she can't live on the island. She can't, from a financial perspective, she has to go first to the US and now to Spain. And that's the story of so many people, who are native born Puerto Ricans or their families left Puerto Rico. Um, and that sort of brought me into contact also with all of these activists that are doing the work to try to keep Puerto Rico for Puerto Ricans. And sort of all those threads sort of came together when I started having this idea. Um,
Okay.
but originally this idea wasn't a cryptid book. It was just a story about what is it like to be an activist in a world where if you go looking for it, you can find things to be outraged about all day long, right? And you can just be consumed with this anger. that sort of turns into like this tunnel vision and isn't,
Yeah.
isn't really that good for actually being a successful activist, when you lose the optimism behind what you're doing. And then eventually, I started thinking about, I've been wanting to do a cryptid book for a really long time.
Okay.
I mentioned like I love the Universal monster movies. Creature from the Black Lagoon is like one of my favorite movies of all time. Um, and something just triggered inside me of like, oh, these two ideas can come together. This idea of like a Latin American cryptid and this story of an activist that's just so angry, um, can come together into, a story where both of these ideas come together and, sort of work.
Well, Daniel, your co-creator, the artist, is Puerto Rican, if I'm
Yeah.
not
Hmm.
mistaken. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was reading a quote from Daniel about the story focusing on the resistance in Puerto Rico, making him feel seen. So I'd imagine being able to channel all of those complex emotions that you've just been talking about your home as an artist has been healing, or at least I hope so for him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he's been super passionate about this book from the beginning. I sort of came in contact with his work when he did Cemetery Kids Don't Die with Zach Thompson.
Yeah.
I think at Oni. Um, but yeah, I've loved his work from the beginning. I think he's such a like interesting cartoonist. And like a real cartoonist, like there's something about like
Yeah.
the facial expressions, like um
Yep.
I don't know. I don't I didn't mean that to sound derogatory towards any other, but like it's like a classic cartooning, that
It is.
I really love, and I love his use of screen tones and like the manga influence that he brings into it as well. And we had Patricio coloring it, who just like what an amazing team. Like Daniel has spent his career coloring himself. This is his first time, or like first time on a long project working with an outside colorist. And I think they're amazing. Like I really hope that not only that Daniel and I get to keep working together, but that Daniel and Patricio stay together as a team. Because the pages are just incredible, like the pages that are coming in. And yeah, this is a book that he's super passionate about. We've had a lot of conversations about his experience during Maria. Um, and also how that sort of comes onto the page and also
Yeah.
comes into the coloring where, he can speak to, his specific experience. Maria hit at like 6 a.m., 5 or 6 a.m., I believe. So, it's not a dark, you know, thunderous hurricane, it was light out. And that's a very unique sort of thing to put on the page. And it's important to represent it in that way. So working with someone like Daniel who has that personal experience, but also is, really passionate about the issues that I'm also passionate about and that I started writing before he was even involved in is just been like an amazing match and amazing collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love the Bende style shading dots of that first issue. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. It is such a throwback style. It's so much fun.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, you a lot of your work focuses on that healing journey. It's very common in your stories. You give your characters agency to push back against narratives of victimhood, powerlessness. So, what have you found particularly rewarding or challenging about trying to channel that through a mythological creature?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. And that's a good observation about my books. I don't know what it says about me that a lot of my characters are angry, angry kids
It says
who,
honest is what it
yeah,
is. I mean, and that's
yeah,
okay. That's a good thing.
yeah. I think the cryptid. I think when the cryptid is used the best in media is when it is a sort of like totem for whatever the real human story is, right? Um, I with this book, the Chupacabra is a sort of manifestation of the anger, the trauma that the people of this island from the time of the indigenous have all felt. Um, and I think his righteous anger is also part of that, right? And his
Mhm.
resistance and his resiliency and his sort of refusal to die, even if he maybe wishes that he there could be an end to this pain. But I think when he and Loli encounter each other, it's this match where they sort of, quite literally, when you read the book, see each other in each other's eyes. So for me, it was really, I'm someone who, outside of my work in comics, I'm also an organizer, and I'm, very involved in, like, here I live in New York City, in, like, political organizing here in the city. And it's very easy to fall into the attitude that Loli has in the beginning of the book, right? That I mentioned, which is very, very angry. There's hundreds of things to be angry about every single day. Um,
Right.
but if you wanna make real change, you require a sort of, like, revolutionary optimism, where you can believe that things can change, that not only can you change people's minds and sort of open up their consciousness, but that you can also change material conditions that you are, struggling against, right? So, that's the place that, we hope to get Loli to by the end of the book, where
Okay.
she realizes that, she can't just be angry. She also has to be hopeful. She also has to take time to heal from her trauma as well. Um,
Yeah.
but first, she needs to stop this development. And luckily she has, this mythological creature that is capable of much more violence than she is, to help her along the way.
So the creature is embodying the empowerment that she's looking for.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I find the different interpretations of the creature just culturally sort of fascinating myself.
Hmm.
I have an anthropology degree. My focus was on the Native American mythologies, so
Cool.
it is kind of near and dear to my heart. So the symbolism between the Chupacabra stays largely the same, whether you're talking about south of the border or in the states. So it's like an invasive
Mm.
threat to life and livelihood either way. But I was thinking about the continental U.S. version. It's more diminutive. It's animalistic. And I can't help looking at a comparison, it being reductive away
Hmm.
from the more cognitive bipedal version in Puerto Rico where its roots are,
Hmm.
not unlike sort of the reductive way the current administration views all immigration, frankly, right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, you can draw a lot of comparisons from that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, your work focuses on the Latinx diaspora, often looking at people's lived experience as immigrants, which involves human migration. Again, something I study and fascinated by with anthropology. So this is kind of a new lens, though, because you're also analyzing it through immigration by like rich foreigners, essentially,
Mhm.
who are coming into the island and that impact. So
Yeah.
so talk to me about using that and kind of flipping the script of your normal narrative style. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, this is a very different book than what I've done before. And I think part of that is because of the form. There's a 5-issue miniseries. My first book was a 5-issue miniseries, but again, like I said, I've spent the last 5 years doing graphic novels. So this was a new
right.
challenge where, I had become very used to to having 250 pages of a continuous story that I can tell. And obviously this book is 5 24-page issues. The difference between a graphic novel and serialized storytelling is so different, not just because I have like half the amount of pages. But because we want to end on a cliffhanger. This, to me, this is TV. Graphic novels is film, right? So
Okay.
it's very different kind of storytelling for me. So it's different in a lot of ways, but like you mentioned, a lot of what this book is about is the rich American European coming to Puerto Rico, to take advantage of tax loopholes, to take advantage of not just the loopholes, but cheaper land that they can
Yeah.
buy, corrupt politicians that, will take money from corporations, from real estate developers, who have spent, a century, more than a century, being bought off by, US corporate interests. So, it's the developer in this story, he's sort of a stand-in for a lot of these American developers that are coming into Puerto Rico right now. A lot of them who really sort of try to take on the culture of Puerto Rico, right? We learned that he's been in Puerto Rico for I think 7 years. Um, and he's someone that feels like he is a Puerto Rican, like you have, I always confuse the brothers. I think it's Logan Paul who's the boxer.
Yeah.
He when
Yep.
he boxes, they say he's from Puerto Rico. He fights under the Puerto Rican flag, and this
It's
is
weird.
yeah, it's weird, right? Like even
It's very
remove
weird.
remove the political aspects of it, which is, obviously very difficult, but it's weird that he would fight under the Puerto Rican flag even though he is, a white guy from I don't know where he is in the US, but, he fights under the Puerto Rican flag. So this is a thing where a lot of these guys try to take on the culture of Puerto Rico and try to take on, the idea that they are Puerto Ricans just like everyone else. When the truth is
Yeah.
that they have more rights just by the way of their tax dollars going further, of them not having to pay taxes because they're living in this island. It's a really complicated situation, and we tried to sort of put all of that into this real estate developer character. Um, and Yeah, I think when you do something like that, it allows you to sort of look at things from a different perspective than from my other books, where the immigrant is normally someone who is like a traditional immigrant to the United States.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a book that, we're both super proud of. Yeah.
Well, for anybody who's not been exposed to this yet, and this was an exposure for me, and I just went down a rabbit hole and read all about this stuff. You've
Mhm,
got the FTC, the FTZs are the foreign trade zone designations, which are these are designated as outside customs territory, which allows businesses to defer, reduce, or outright eliminate foreign goods duties, which and other incentives, which basically gives people who are rich a complete and total capital safe haven, you
mhm,
know? And then connecting that I thought was interesting too, doing a little research there in Aguadilla that is an area of the country that highlights this income equality that has directly resulted from all this foreign investment.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I said, it came from a lot of research. The I think the first thing that I so there right now there's a project called Essencia in Puerto Rico. That has sort of become a flashpoint over the last maybe 5 years of showcasing just like the corruption of a corporation being able to pay off, local politicians to get permits to build on what should be protected land. And in
Yeah.
Puerto Rico, there's a law that says that all of the beaches should be public. So the beaches belong to the people. But what we see happen a lot of times with these sort of private resorts is that they eliminate all access to the beach from the outside, unless you're, a guest of this resort or this luxury, complex. And Essencia is set to be one of the largest, if not the largest, of these developments. And it continues to go through the process of being approved. And I saw a video about this a couple of years ago. There's a really great Puerto Rican journalist named Bianca Grau, who I really recommend anybody check out her video. She has a really great long video about the Essencia project, which is
Okay.
sort of the inspiration for the project that we have in this book that is the flashpoint for Awaken the Chupacabra and for Loli protesting. But yeah, a lot of this just comes, and all my books come from, my own curiosity, right? Like my book, Si Se Puede, my nonfiction, that just came from, going down Wikipedia black holes.
Yeah.
My
I
Blue
did.
Beetle, yeah, my Blue Beetle graphic novel, This Land Is Our Land, which is truly, it's about radicalization of young men, came from really doing a lot of research into like, how do these like 15, 16-year-old kids fall down these white supremacist rabbit holes? What is the algorithm doing to them that get them from watching like a nonfiction video about a war to then watching, replacement theory propaganda, Um,
Yeah.
and how are they recruited by these like neo-Nazi groups? And that's where a Blue Beetle graphic novel came from, just like these curiosities and these sort of like black holes that I go down. And again, that's where this came from. And not just that, but also, a big part of what has in recent years influenced my writing has been interviewing people. So with this book, I had so many conversations with people, not just friends, but people that they would put me in contact with. In issue two, there is a big scene that I'm really proud of that takes place in a botanica. A botanica is like a spiritual store.
Yeah.
Like with Santeria, and all of these sort of like uh branches, like Afro-Caribbean branches of Catholicism.
Yeah.
Um, and that whole scene, it's, I was talking to a friend of mine, Darren, who, practices spiritualism, and literally taking notes of, like, how every single thing is done, and that just went straight into the book, into all of my panel descriptions for Daniel, and now as the pages have come in, like, it looks incredible, it's also accurate, and that's stuff that's, like, just super important to us, not just because the research is my favorite part, of writing a book, but because I want you know, I think the majority of the people that read this book are not gonna be people who are Puerto Rican, are not gonna be people who, you know, uh, practice spiritualism or whatever. But to the people that are, I want them to read it and see themselves and feel like we got everything right. And that's
Yeah.
a big part of like making sure that, I can do all the research in the world, but also making sure that I worked with a Puerto Rican artist and not just a Puerto Rican artist, but a Puerto Rican artist that is really passionate about these issues, which is what I found in Daniel, which is really just taking the book to new heights and makes the research more than just like, you know, a s an academic sort of thing, but, like a really great tropical horror book that is also accurate.
Yeah. It portrays a lived in experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, I gotta ask here. This is just casual gringo interest. Like, a Botanica versus a Yerbarea. What? Because I've been in quite a few of the latter, and that in the
Mhm.
Southwest and stuff. What's the difference? Do you know?
That's a good question, I don't know. So in
Okay.
Miami and parts of the Caribbean, it's you see botanicas everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And there were places that I, as someone who was raised as an evangelical Christian going to Spanish church, was warned not to go into one of them.
Okay.
The Spanish church that I went to when I was a kid, was actually in a strip mall that also had a botanica, and, like, literally, we were not allowed to walk in front like, past the door of the botanica.
Okay.
There's so much, like, paranoia, I guess, of, like, witchcraft and, santeria, and, like, you'd learn that one of your neighbors was a santero, and you'd like, just all these rumors would form, like, but yeah, I don't know the answer to your question, but my experience has always been with, botanicas.
Okay. Okay. Well, looking back at your work, and one of the things I absolutely love about it is the positivity of it. And there are lots of eat the rich narratives that are dropping right now in comics. And it makes perfect sense, right? Comics have always been a culturally responsive medium in terms of being able to get it out there fast.
Yeah.
Prose and films, there's this tendency to get really dark. You've talked about activism. The book is focusing on trauma and on vulnerability. So when film tries to tackle it, I guess it's cathartic, but it's very rarely uplifting. So for you as a writer, what makes comics kind of this unique pocket to promote that sense of positivity?
Yeah. I talked a little bit before about the idea of revolutionary optimism, right?
Yeah.
Which is the idea that even when things are just getting worse and worse every day, right? Which I think is the reality that a lot of us are seeing. It's the idea that if we believe in making change, if we believe in struggling against, the things that we oppose, the things that we see, we have to have some optimism. Otherwise, there's no point, right? What are we doing any of this for if it's all just fatalism and it's all just,
Yeah.
it's not going to lead us to anywhere. So that I think because that is my orientation, my political orientation, or my, mental orientation. Um, and it doesn't come naturally to me. I tend to be a very pessimistic person sometimes. But it's something that I try to remind myself of. I think that because of that, it comes through in the work.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of cathartic moments in this book, right? Where you see the Chupacabra, violently, taking revenge on people that deserve it, right? Um, but the work that we do before that, after that, sort of, I would like to think is more than just revenge fantasy and makes it feel much more earned, makes it feel much more real and grounded in the actual issues. Um,
Yeah.
but to your point, my first book, Home, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's the story. It takes place during the 2018 family separation crisis at the border, and it's the story of a young boy who is torn away from his mom when he arrives at the U.S. border in McAllen, Texas. But unlike all the other kids, he has superpowers, so he's able to break out and go on a journey to try to reunite with his mom. That is a book that it felt extremely urgent at the time. Um, and unfortunately, it still feels super relevant. It's still the book that when I'm doing a convention, the most people come up to me, ask me when there's going to be more. We still sell, like, that book still sells a lot of copies for a
Yeah.
book that is 5 years old, which I think is very unfortunate. I wish that it was a book that was in line with what a book of 5 years should be selling because it wasn't relevant anymore. But that book was made with a lot of urgency. Um, and because it was my first book, I had to learn how the industry worked. I had to learn how to write comics before I can make that and make a bunch of mini comics first. So even though it takes place in 2018, it came out in 2021. Um, and if I was trying to react to that moment today, I could probably do it a lot faster because I'm already
Yeah.
involved in the industry. And I
Sure.
know artists. I didn't know any artists back then. I met Anna, the artist of that book, on Reddit. Um, but yeah, I think the nature of comics allows you of direct market comics, because it's very different in the graphic novel book market, allows you to have, much more urgency. And with this book, you know, again, it is about something that is still taking place and it does feel urgent. But it's
Yeah.
something that's been happening for a long time. This is not something that is just happening for the first time, like family separation was. It's something that's been going on for a long time and that's been getting a lot more attention recently, mostly because of the Essencia project being such a huge, large, and so obviously corrupt project. And I think the work that, it might sound silly to someone who isn't aware, but Bad Bunny has been such a huge
Yeah.
part of raising the consciousness, the political consciousness about Puerto Rico and the political situation in Puerto Rico. So I think we're at a moment where that the book is hitting at a time where there is a lot of people are there's awareness, there's a lot more awareness. Um, but, I also do, sort of shy away from books that are about, you know, I'm not gonna name any names, but, like, uh, you know, I think it's a little weird to have a book that has, like, a January 6th moment 6 months after January 6th, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that is the benefit of, if you are, making comics in a responsible way about urgent political moments, I think it's a great medium for that, because we can do it quickly. And it is a sort of, we can all complain about how difficult it is to pre-order comics and to get single issue comics, but at its heart, comics is a populist medium, and it's something that becomes more popular every day. Comics in general, maybe not like
Yeah.
single issue direct market comics. But um, but yeah, so I think that's a huge positive that I sort of really missed when I was making, or I still am making, but when I was exclusively making young adult and middle grade graphic novels.
So is that why you focused more on the young adult market. I mean, because there's a way to make an impact there that you can't with, just mature. Like, okay, if the readership in general is aging in the
Mhm.
floppies direct market comment, that I would represent more as like the 50-year-old white guy,
Yeah.
and the younger generation is the manga generation. It feels like focusing in that area. It's easier to make an impact. It's easier to shape people who are more malleable, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also with, I mentioned my Blue Beetle graphic novel. It was part of
Yeah,
DC's YA line. Um, I don't think that I could have made that book as a single issue series in the direct market. I don't think that I could have made a book about like the radicalization of young white men and how that intersects with the radicalization of the scarab that it does on Jaime. And have this book that is just really just about neo-Nazi radicalization as a single issue direct market DC mainline book.
yeah,
But in the YA graphic novel market and the middle grade graphic novel market, there is a much more openness to talking about these hard issues, which is kind of ironic because you would think that you're working with younger kids, right? That you need to be more, age appropriate, but there is so much more um, openness to these topics in that market, which is something that I'm super grateful for. And I think that's probably why I've spent so much time in that space. And that has become such an important space in my writing. But I started off in comics trying to make single issue comics. So that's still a huge part of the work that I want to do.
yeah,
And with this, I could have made a YA version of this story, but I don't think that I would have been able to hit as hard some of the themes that I wanted to, and make it as
sure,
gory and violent the way that I felt like a monster, horror book should be.
yeah,
Um, so this felt like the right thing to sort of come to the direct market with again, and being able to tell a story for adults, which I love telling stories for adults. And I actually have in September I'll have another series coming out with Boom, a 5 issue miniseries. And then I'll have my first DC series starting sometime next year.
nice.
So I'll
Okay.
be sticking around the direct market from now on.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. Well, this particular, Boriken is I thought it was a absolute gripping first issue. It's very
Thank you.
cohesive, pulling all these threads together and weaving them together in a way that makes sense is no easy task, and props for never shying away from harsh realities. And there's something poetic about this dropping right before the 4th of July, in my opinion. I have no idea if that's coincidence, but when is final order cut off, just to remind people so they can make sure to get pre-orders in?
Yeah, it's May 25th.
May 25th. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll make sure to put that in the show notes for everybody.
awesome.
And speaking of opportune timing releases, your middle grade Hillside Valley graphic novel, Soul Goes for Gold, drops right before the World Cup starts.
Yeah.
So I know you have a lifelong love of the beautiful game as I do. So what do you think of Colombia's prospects this year?
I feel pretty good. I'm really excited. I just started my World Panini World Cup album, which is something that
Yes.
I've
Sweet.
I've I've done my sticker album since the France '98 World Cup. Um,
Okay.
I just I'm actually in the middle right now of sticking my I opened my first box.
Is there a
I
Lucho in there?
Not yet.
Oh,
I do have Hamas, who I got already,
okay.
which I'm trying to find him real quick. There we go. So I got to
Sweet.
stick all these, and I got the Colombian team photo.
Nice.
But yeah, so I'm excited. I feel good about Colombia. I really like their new away jersey, so I want to get
Yeah.
that one. And yeah, so Soul Goes for Goal. This is the advanced reader copy. So this is book two in my Hillside Valley series. Book one was this bilingual graphic novel called Speak of Santiago. The middle grade, for those that, I know that most of your listeners are probably direct market readers. Middle grade is like third to seventh grade readers. Um, And with Speak Up Santiago, it's the story of this Colombian American kid named Santiago who really struggles to speak Spanish. Even though his family tried to or intended to raise him bilingual, he had an issue with speech when he was younger, so they focused only on English. Now he's 12 and he's really passionate about learning how to speak Spanish. So he spends the month with his grandmother who only speaks Spanish. He spends the summer with in her small town called Hillside Valley, and along the way, he meets all these kids, including Soul, and they start a soccer team. And then in book two, in Soul Goes for Goal, Soul joins. We sort of the idea with this series is that every book shifts POV to another character
Yep.
in the friend group, but continues the story, so all the characters are still involved. But Soul starts seventh grade, joins her middle school soccer team, and is a kid kind of like me that is sort of has a lot of perfectionism issues. It's something that I dealt with a lot as a kid and as an adult. And so she wants to be the best soccer player. She wants to be the best friend. She wants to be the best student. Um, but she's also in seventh grade and she's getting her first crush, and it happens to be on one of her teammates. So she, is distracted. She's not playing as well as she can. And it also leads to issues within her friend group where she's not really being a great friend either. So this is book two. It's a sort of standalone sequel. You don't need to read book one, but if you do, you'll get a lot more sort of Easter eggs and context. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. Speak Up Santiago has been my best-selling book of all of my books. It's
Okay.
only been out for about a year. Um, and it's just been embraced by schools and libraries. I've really spent the last year traveling around the country doing school author visits, which is
Yeah.
when, you go to a school and you present about the book, you talk to students about it, you answer questions about what it's like to be an author. And, it's just been amazing, like meeting, these readers that I write these books for, which is so different than, you know, the comics market where sometimes it might feel like it's a market of collectors at times. It's a very, it's just very different. So to meet these kids who bring you like their beat and battered copies of your graphic novel because they've read it so many times,
I
is
love
just
that.
a really special experience.
Well, you have these comprehensive teacher guides as well. So
Yeah.
I can't recall ever having seen that before, at least this comprehensively. So was that something you always wanted to do starting out as a writer, or how'd that come about?
It's not. It came about because of home. So,
Okay.
sometime after the first issue came out, this group called Reimagining Migration reached out to me, and they sort of educated me on educator guides, and they told me, that this is something that they do, and they actually offered to do it for free. To just, they're a nonprofit, and I think maybe they were like starting out with educator guides, so they offered to
Yeah.
do it for free. It was super comprehensive. If you have the trade for home, it's like 24 pages at the back of it, just filled with contextualizing information, historical information, and discussion questions and activities that teachers can just put into their curriculum. So it sort of serves 2 functions. One, um, it sort of makes a graphic novel, I think things have changed a lot, but there's still a lot of, negative perceptions around graphic novels amongst, like, the old guard of teachers and
Right.
educators and sometimes, like, administration. So
It's not
if you
literature.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, that's one of the things
Yeah.
that a lot of them say, but things have changed a lot. Graphic novels have become so popular with kids. And now with these teachers' guides, it serves the function of sort of showing administration and showing, the gatekeepers that there is educational value in these books. But also, it makes life easier for the teachers who already have to, wrestle with all this curriculum that, they can choose a book that they enjoy and they think will be good for their students. And they
Yeah.
already have, activities, they already have discussion questions, so that was my introduction to it, and then ever since then, I have made it because of the impact that that book made in classrooms. I've really just had all of my publishers create teachers guides for the books. Um, my Blue Beetle graphic novel at DC, it's the first time DC ever made a teacher's guide. So I was really happy that we got to, they didn't say yes right away, had to bully them a little bit, but,
Good for you.
a lot of people are using it. It's a great guide. It's actually made by the same person that made, the one for home. And,
Okay.
uh, and yeah, now every single one of my books has had one. I'm actually, even though Beast of Boriken is an adult comic, I'm trying to get Tiny Onion to make a teacher's guide for it, so it can be used in
Okay.
like a high school context. I think that would still be appropriate.
Yeah.
To talk about like this could very easily be used in a social studies or civics class, to talk about Puerto Rico, or even in a history class. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I think about now as a comic book creator that makes graphic novels and that is so like entrenched in the school and library space. Um, I think it's just a great way to keep your books in people's hands and keep it relevant. And it's been a great thing. Like I'd love to. I wish I could know how many copies of Home ended up in people's hands because of the Educator Guide. Because when I'm at
Yeah.
conventions, like there'll be people flipping through it. They'll see the Educator Guide and then they'll pick it up because of that. So yeah, it's been an amazing tool.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. Like when my son was in elementary school, I volunteered in the classroom and with the scholastic book fairs. I wish there were more resources like this. Both
Yeah.
my parents were public school teachers. And I think now more than ever, just having a simple, readily available resource to support early childhood learning is it's such a gift. It's really, really cool that you're doing that.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, as is my custom, I like to end things on a positive note, and we do that with a shout out. So this could be someone doing something nice for you recently that you'd like to mention, or something that inspired you. And I'll go first, just give you a moment to think about it. And I just wanted to say a quick thanks to everybody
Mm.
who stepped out and volunteered to help out with Free Comic Book Day. Make that a resounding success this year. Having been involved in event production myself, it takes a village, and there was so much positivity online on social media, which is usually not positive, with people talking about their experiences, getting their kids involved, how great the experiences were for their kids, how long the lines were. So it makes me feel good about where things are going and about the medium. So yeah, I was happy about that. What do you got?
Awesome. Going off of the school and library bit, I was just recently at TLA, the Texas Library Association conference, and
Yeah,
it was an amazing space. It was an amazing convention, very different than comic book conventions. But I met so many amazing librarians. So shout out, thank you to all the librarians. Especially in a state like Texas, they're doing such important work to make sure that they still get, fighting through the censors, fighting through the book bans, to still get into kids' hands books that are important and that'll, make them feel seen and that will also teach them about people that are not like themselves. So, yeah, shout out to all librarians, but, Texas librarians are doing really good work right now, really hard work.
absolutely. God, yes, absolutely. We need them so desperately. Well,
Yeah.
all right, Julio, thanks for joining me today on the show and hanging out, giving me a bit of an education with your book. I really appreciated that. I'm sure it will inspire more Google diving, as I hope to become more rounded and educated person just about all of the plight that Puerto Rico has faced over the years. And I'm simultaneously grateful for being educated and embarrassed about my lack of knowledge. So
That's a good place to be because we're learning new things every day. That's how I feel all the time. So, yeah, thank you
yeah,
so much for having me.
absolutely. Well, this is Byron O'Neill on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Peace.